Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And friends, I want to talk about boundaries. Now, and I'm not talking about just like, I don't really like it when you do that, and I don't really want this, but I'm talking about true deep level boundaries, both in your work with your clients, your coworkers, your boss, but also in your life, your everyday. And this is no easy topic to simplify, especially when we're recording through a pandemic, which I think is all the more reason for us to tackle it today. My special guest today is Nancy Levin. She's a master coach and best-selling author of several books, including her latest, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free. She's the former event director at Hay House for over a decade, and Nancy is the creator of the Levin Life Coach Academy, offering in-depth coaching and training programs designed to support clients in making themselves a priority and setting boundaries that stick. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Nancy Levin. Hey, Nancy.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you're holding up in this whole pandemic craziness. What a funny book to read during lockdown for me personally. And I did enjoy it greatly. And a lot of my listeners know I have been open in sharing my journey through recovery of codependency in my own life. It's an eye-opening experience once you realize that this is a thing happening to you. And when your people reached out to my people and said, hey, would you be interested in interviewing Nancy? And I started to read a little bit about you and your bio, and I was like, oh my goodness, obviously the answer is yes. You kick off the book with a story about when you were an events director at Hay House, and Wayne Dyer, an incredible speaker, had to speak in, was it Chicago, and misplaced his briefcase. And you did what almost every events professional that I know of and have worked with would instantly think to do, of like, well, I have to go get the briefcase. Can you recount this story and tell it to people?
Sure. So we were on tour, and we had done an event in Atlanta on Saturday afternoon. And then the whole entourage of us, my team, and Wayne had a couple of his kids with him. So there were about 10 of us flying from Atlanta. It was Detroit, actually. So we were flying to Detroit.
Yeah.
And we had an event on Sunday afternoon in Detroit. And we, landed in Detroit. We got to our hotel. We had dinner. And then around 10 o'clock that night, Wayne called me and said, hey, I can't find my briefcase. And he was a little panicky, not blaming me in any way, but just, I need this briefcase. All my notes are in there for the talk tomorrow. My notes for my new book.
Yeah.
There was some money. There was stuff in the briefcase that he needed. And so, I said, okay, hold tight. Let me see what I can do.
Yeah.
And I first called my travel agent in California, just to say, if I find the briefcase in Atlanta, what are our options? Can you start working on that? And then I just had this intuitive hunch that it was in the van that we all took to the airport, because Wayne didn't travel with his briefcase. He only used it to and from the hotel to the venue. So we left right from the venue. So it was an additional piece of luggage that he wasn't used to being aware of when we were traveling.
Yeah.
So I just had this hunch it's in that van. And so I called the van company. They said the van's actually out on another gig until midnight. You can call back then. So I called back at midnight, and they said, we looked, there's no briefcase. And I said, listen, it's dark. The briefcase is black. I just know it's in the van.
Yeah.
And I was on hold for a good long time. And the guy came back on and said, you were right. It had slid all the way to the back in a corner, and we needed like a flashlight, and we found it. And I said, great. Can you put one of your guys, we'll pay, obviously we'll pay for everything. Can you put a guy on an airplane and bring it to me? And he said, post 9/11, you're no longer allowed to travel with something that isn't yours. And he said, so we're not allowed to do that. So in the meantime, my travel agent had been looking for ways to get this here without me going to get it. And the bottom line was that because it was a Saturday night, there were no freight carriers, there was no FedEx, there was no UPS, and there were no airlines that would cargo overnight to a Sunday. Had it been nearly any other day of the week, it could have happened. But just given the Saturday, Sunday, it was a no-go.
Yeah.
So literally the next thing I knew, I found myself, in a taxi on the way to the airport, buying the ticket in the back of the taxi to get on the airplane, to fly to Atlanta, to get the briefcase, to then fly back for the event.
Yeah.
Now, we had about 2,500 people coming to that event. My team had never done an event without me present at that point. So I was also frantically like, here's my venue contact. Here's how the seating needs to be. Make sure this is what's in the green room. Make sure of this, make sure of that, blah, blah, blah. And there was before around midnight, same thing. Wayne had called me and said, any news? And I said, actually, I've located the briefcase. I'm just now working on getting it here. So I was like, just go to sleep.
Don't worry.
I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, don't worry. I'll see you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I fly to Atlanta. The guy's waiting for me in baggage claim. So I go retrieve the briefcase, and then now I've got to go right back through. And because I had just flown in, of course, I'm a red flag, and they want to, give me the whole pat down and the whole questioning. But I find myself back on the plane flying back to Detroit, and Wayne calls me, and I said, Wayne, I have your briefcase. And he said, Nancy, what do you mean you have my briefcase? And I said, I have your briefcase. And he said, you didn't do anything crazy, did you? And I said, Wayne, I'll see you at the venue. He's like, where are you? I said, that is not important. I'll see you at the venue.
Yeah.
And so I we in tandem pull up at the venue. There's hundreds of people around. Wayne gets out of the car. I get out of the taxi, and I'm walking toward him, and I'm holding out the briefcase, and to pull my leg, because Wayne was that kind of guy. Mm-hmm. He was like, oh, I don't need that, and so
and your heart sank.
So I of course had to flip him off in front of everybody.
You're right.
So this was the moment of I flipped off the father of motivation,
right.
In front of hundreds of people.
You can put that on your resume,
Exactly. And then as we got I always introduced him at the event. So I introduced him and, he came on stage and he held me to stay because I would always give him a hug. Yeah. He held me and he said, he said to the audience, I just want to tell you what this woman just did for me, and it's really interesting to look back on that story because it was, on one level, it is absolutely the pinnacle story of being boundaryless.
Yeah. Yeah, completely and utterly.
But the person I was then, she would have done anything for the external validation and the gold stars.
Yeah. And
so if a situation arose like that today, I would really have to drop in and think about what would give me the impulse or the motivation to do something like that. Yeah. And it would really need to come from a place of deep service versus how can I be the hero?
Right.
Versus how can I get another gold star? And that was the big shift.
So when I read that intro story, you had me hooked because I can tell you there have been many moments of superhuman, heroic links that I would have gone to and had gone through for many of my clients when I still worked in live events. And I know that there are a lot of people that are listening right now that are going, "Yep, I would have done that, no doubt." Whereas the reality of majority of the world would go, "What? It's just a briefcase." Surely the man who is a motivational keynote speaker knows how to do the talk without,
of course,
the briefcase, right?
Of course.
But when you work inside the live events industry, you are certain expectations and wiring from very early on to lay down all sense of boundaries and go to the nth degree, where people don't go and are not willing to go, to people please, to over deliver, to, all the things. That is what is recognized. That's what's awarded at, international awards ceremonies at the end of the year, all the things. And the problem with that is, yes, there's a short-term, wow, Nancy, you did that? That's incredible. But there's a long-term consequence to that kind of behavior. What did you notice in your life?
Yeah, and I really prided myself on being Queen of the Impossible. It became the nickname. It became, it was like, you need anything at any time, call Nancy.
She can do it.
And I did, you know. And really the cost is the self-abandonment, and the thing really is to understand that when we're chasing gold stars, no amount of gold stars will ever be enough to fill the void. And we have to learn we really have to learn how to resolve internally what we're seeking externally.
Yeah.
And so while I will say that my boundarylessness made me exceptional at my job, it took a really big toll on my health. It took a big toll on my personal life. Yeah. It took a big toll on all the ways in which I was willing to make sure everyone else had what they needed and I would go without.
Yeah, and which is not sustainable. I mean, bottom line, not sustainable.
Not at all.
Whether you're doing it in your work and not doing it at home, it bleeds over to all aspects of your life. So why do you think then that some women just seem to struggle to define or even uphold their boundaries, personally or professionally? Why is it that we seem to have a harder time at it than men do?
So I think we're really brought up with this notion embedded that, nice girls do what they're told. It's not kind to say no. These ingrained beliefs around what it is to be good and kind and nice.
Yep. Yeah.
And so that is what precipitates and then propels the people-pleasing, the peacekeeping, the conflict avoiding, the not rocking the boat, and this other element of I'm going to come in and I'm going to rescue, fix, save someone else.
Yeah. And then you can appreciate me. Then I'm worthy to take up space here. For some people, that might be the inner dialogue that's going. I want to read a little bit from your book, if you don't mind. And this is really early on in the introduction. And if this resonates with you, whoever's listening right now, just, nod your head a little and say, yeah, that's kind of me as well. So Nancy, you wrote this, The Real Me. I had spent years hiding the real me. I worked hard to design a life that had no room for me. At the time, the idea that people could truly know me and in all my vulnerabilities was nothing short of terror-inducing. I was so afraid of anyone discovering my humanity that I was a champion, do-it-all doormat. I believed the only way I could be loved was by presenting my facade of superwoman to everyone in my life, from my family to my friends to my coworkers. I had to be the person everyone needed me to be, the chameleon who would put her own needs aside to make sure everyone else's needs were met. So, I mean, yes, every last bit of that, yes. Side note, Nancy, you do realize that the Simplifiers logo has a woman in a superhero cape.
Yes, I do. That's not lost on me.
Yes, okay, good. Just making sure.
That's not lost on me.
So, and then you also kind of go on to say, that was the beginning of my quest to becoming a boundary badass. But it meant that I had to stop saying yes to others' needs, wants, and desires in order to be loved and accepted. It meant that I had to learn how to tell the truth and create connections with others in a more authentic way. Rather than wowing them with one selfless act after another, it was a difficult transition. So, yeah, I mean, I think that that's where people-pleasing, gaining enough stickers for my sticker chart, it comes from deep-rooted lessons as a child. I mean, it's what's taught in schools. Yeah,
and you brought in worthiness before, and I've written a book called Worthy, and there is this whole element of the way we hitch our worthiness to someone else's wagon.
Yeah.
How do we determine our sense of value and worth? Most people are, and I certainly did for decades, attached my self-worth to what I achieved, what I produced, what I did. And so when we are attaching our worth to an outcome like that, or hitching our worthiness to someone else's wagon, letting them be the determiner of our worth, it's a very precarious position to be in, because we're not standing in our own foundation of worthiness that essentially is our birthright just by being here.
Yeah. And I can imagine a lot of people through this lockdown situation, a couple of months now, if your worthiness is built on deliverables, in essence, and other people recognizing and appreciating and validating those deliverables, and we're literally in a space of stillness in a lot of ways, or many people, their jobs have been furloughed. That can be a hard place to be. Talk about a place of reflection of where your identity actually comes from. It's big stuff.
It's very big stuff, and it's something I've been talking about in my membership and with my clients, and with it's something that's really alive right now in terms of, yes, where have I been really giving away my power, or where have I been dissociating from my identity, and also what happens now in terms of being willing to put my own self at the center of my life.
Yeah.
As opposed to everything else.
Imagine.
And to me, this is, imagine. But that really is sort of the first piece of being able to move into looking at our boundaries. We have to locate ourselves first. I spent decades of my life having no idea where I was. I was just going to the next thing, doing the next thing. But there was no sort of locating and grounding and landing in the foundation of me. And so, when we look at this, and first, I'll say my definition of boundaries is the boundaries are the limits that we set around what we will or will not do, tolerate, or accept. So it's very personal. Our boundaries are very personal. There can be some sort of universal boundaries that everyone's sort of living with, but our boundaries are personal. And at the root, my boundaries are always between me and me, even if they involve another person. But at the heart, my boundaries are between me and me. And in order to know what my boundaries even are, I have to start discerning what is okay, what isn't okay, what can I live with, what won't I live without. Understanding those fundamental pieces first before I can even be able to name a boundary, even if it's just with myself.
Yeah, and that really resonates with me as well. I feel like our words are so powerful. I heard an interview recently of Eckhart Tolle, and he refused to use the word lockdown. And he said, you know what, instead, this isn't a period of lockdown. This is a period of reset. And that really, truly is there. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to reset some core truths deep down inside, so that when we do emerge into our new normal, that we can start to define and look things differently. So boundaries can be in the physical realm, emotional, energetic, mental, and also material, like money and property and things. So where do we begin? Like, how do we begin to write and practice what you call boundary scripts?
Yes. So we first want to identify what is important to us, what our desires are, what our preferences are. We first want to be able to put ourselves into our own life. This is what I find, back to the question you had about why are so many women, in this predicament, let's say, and really it's because we have abandoned ourselves to such a degree that we've disowned our desires. We've sublimated our wants and needs, and we have gotten okay with that. We would rather take the hit than have anyone else be disappointed or upset or angry. This is another way we cross our own boundaries, is that we try to manage someone else's experience, or we try to take too much responsibility more than is ours. And so we have to be able to locate and find what's okay and what we want and what we need. And then we have to start being willing to put it into words. So first thing I'll say is the biggest myth going about boundaries is that other people cross our boundaries. So I hear from clients time and time again, I set a boundary, but so-and-so keeps crossing it. Well, other people will do what they do.
Yeah.
And a boundary is not about someone else changing. A boundary is not about someone else changing. A boundary is about what's okay or not okay for me and what I'm going to do to honor and take care of myself.
Yeah. And that was a big turning point for me when I was reading the book of like, oh, the only person that's really crossing your boundaries is yourself. Like when you reduce that and just go, well, that's something that I kind of need, but I'll just let it flow. How many times do we cross our own boundaries or go, yeah, it's no big deal. But actually it is kind of a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So how do you know, like, if you need to set boundaries in the first place? Where is the red flags there?
Yeah. Red flag is resentment. As soon as we feel the resentment rising, what it's really signaling is, a boundary is being crossed and I actually need to put something in place. And I need to, I do a whole piece in the book around your boundary scripts, as you mentioned, and some boundaries don't need to be verbalized and some do. And we want to also be aware that there are always going to be consequences to setting boundaries and consequences to not setting boundaries. So when we set the boundary, first of all, if we're going to verbalize it to someone else, we have to know that we are going to put our money where our mouth is and we're going to uphold it because that's everything. Otherwise, we're just the little girls who cried wolf.
Right, because we're just expecting the other person to read their mind, and that's not possible yet.
Right, that's not yet. Right, exactly. So, I use a really simple script of, I feel X when you do or say Y.
Yeah.
And in order to take care of myself, in order to honor myself, I'm going to do Z. So it can simply be something like, Mom, I feel pulled out of my work when you call me during the day.
Yeah.
So I'm just letting you know that from here on out, I'm only going to answer the phone before 10 a.m. and after 6 p.m.
And it's beautiful,
so
simple.
Yeah, I didn't say don't call me.
Yeah.
And I didn't say, I didn't tell her what to do. I just let her know, you can call me 27 times today, but I'm going to answer the phone here or here.
Yeah.
So I've let her know what works for me. She can do what she wants to do. I can't control her calling me or not calling me. Yeah. What I can control is my response. So this is the kicker for most women. We don't want to sit with the discomfort. We don't want to sit with seeing missed call, missed call, missed call, missed call, missed call. We would rather cross our own boundary, take ourselves out of the flow of what we're doing, just so that we don't have to sit with the discomfort and we don't have to wonder if so-and-so is mad. And this is a really critical piece. We have to learn how to sit with our discomfort.
Yeah, and
we have to learn.
The short-term discomfort really result for a long-term outcome.
Long-term.
Because that's the thing is that, queen of not wanting to have any confrontation, I'm getting better at this. However, in the past I would be like, well, I'll just let it slide. And the truth is that short-term discomfort is that you are now creating long-term discomfort over time that is compounding.
And long-term resentment.
And getting worse.
Right. That's right. It's getting worse. And because we're so used to, just this time, or I'll just take the hit, or I'll be uncomfortable versus someone else being uncomfortable. But, it's also important to talk about conflict, and to talk about, I view conflict as an illumination of our differences. And so it doesn't have to be bad, and it doesn't have to be something where we butt heads. It can simply be, it's a little bit like the we agree to disagree kind of thing. Yeah. But it's really what I believe is that if we're in relationship of any kind, if we're in intimate partnership, or if, we're friends or we're family or coworkers, we want to trust that the container of our relationship can hold the truth of each of us.
Yeah.
And so what I really believe about fear of conflict is it's not so much about the conflict, it's actually a greater fear that the relationship we're in doesn't hold.
That there will be rejection or abandonment or shame.
Or that we will have to make a deeper decision about the nature of the relationship.
I see. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And, it is the deeper rooted things that are underneath the issue, the conflict,
right.
And I think that gives me something to chew on certainly this week of I think sometimes we as humans like to quickly judge right, wrong, good, bad,
Yes.
all the things. And it's not quite so binary. And illuminating our differences means that it's not you're right, I'm wrong, or vice versa. It's something deeper. And that I appreciate that because there's a dance to it, isn't there?
Yeah. And there is the appreciation of, oh, that's where you're coming from. And knowing this from you helps me know you more deeply, which really is what I think ultimately boundaries are. I look at boundaries when we're sharing our boundaries with another person. We're saying, here are the puzzle pieces to me.
Right.
Here are the pages of my operating manual.
Yeah.
Here are the ways that you can know me more deeply in service of connection. And in service of us being able to have a more open and honest communication.
Yeah.
Because that open communication is what's kind. We go into that thing of, we think, oh, if I set boundaries, I'm going to be a bitch or whatever, And no, it's withholding your truth is what makes you actually unkind.
Right. And so what's interesting is in my own journey of learning more about codependency, I interviewed Terry Cole a while back. I'll put the link in the show notes. Oh, she's so great. Such a brilliant light.
Fabulous.
And, I think that one of the things that came up in that conversation, base level when it comes to codependency, is there's typically two different players in this equation. One who's the fixer and enabler in essence, and the other who is retreating back. And so I think one of the clear core truths that you have to understand is you are only able to control your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, and behaviors and actions. What happens is that the fixer, the enabler, tries to control the other person's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, emotions, and actions. So what would be some advice when it comes to boundary setting that you would give someone who's also going through that step of conquering codependency?
Yeah. So, the big piece with codependency here is the way that we look to someone else to regulate us.
Yeah.
So we want someone else to regulate us emotionally.
Yeah.
And so the process here is, how do we begin to be in contact with ourselves in a way that we can regulate without needing someone else? And so we're not looking for approval. We're not looking for validation. We're not getting off on the fixing or rescuing. We're really allowing other people in our lives to be exactly who they are.
Yeah.
And to be an acceptance of who they are.
Yeah.
Because the way we create more suffering for ourselves is not accepting what is. So if we can move into an acceptance of you as you are, and I'm going to do what I need to do over here for me. And that really is the way that we can begin to conquer codependence. Because the other way codependence gets very insidious, like I was saying before, it's not knowing where I end and you begin. So there's this, border between our two territories, and I just keep crossing the border over into your territory.
Yeah.
And I want to manage your experience. I want to take responsibility for you. And it's like, hey, stay over here. And there's enough to do over here.
Yeah, more than plenty.
And more than plenty. And also to notice when our mind goes to that place of, and this happens, and this would be interesting just for everyone listening to think about, When a direct question is asked of you, notice if you answer from I or he or she, meaning you answer from a place of your partner or of someone else in your life. He wouldn't like it if I did that, or something like that. This is a very insidious way in which our codependent shows up, that we consider someone else before we consider ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So instead of going to the mode of what will he think or she do or they say, to actually take the pause to check in. What do I think? What do I feel? What do I need? What do I want? And so I really look at this as sort of a 3-tier process of, first, be willing to give yourself permission to consider yourself and your own needs at least as much as you consider everyone else in your life. At least as much.
Yeah.
Just baseline, at least as much. Because what usually happens is we set the table with the fine china and the crystal and the silver and the juicy steak or the juicy tofu, and we make sure everyone has a seat and has what they need, and we're standing in the kitchen in the dark eating the crumbs over the sink.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is figurative, but clients have also told me how very literal this is.
Yeah.
So this is about, hey, I get a seat at the table. I get a seat at my own table. And in fact, I'm going to now move myself to the head of the table. And that's, so it's, am I willing to give myself permission to really consider myself and my needs at least as much? Then it's, am I willing to give myself permission to consider my needs more? Consider what I need more than I consider everyone else.
Yeah.
And then the kicker, which is sort of what I call the boundary ninja move, is now am I willing to consider myself first before I consider anyone else? And nowhere in here did I say disregard everyone else. But anyone listening, just notice if you heard that. Just notice if you in your own mind twisted that into, I'm only considering myself and no one else.
Right.
No, it's a both and. I'm going to consider myself and consider you, and I'm going to consider myself more. And I'm going to consider myself first.
It's again the subtlety of the words that really make a profound difference of how this lands in people's heads and hearts and their intuition and soul. I mean, this is back to the boundary pyramid, as you say in the book, right? Like those 3 areas, and more and first does not mean instead of you getting anything that you want.
Right.
So that's what I really take away from that. And one of the things I really liked about your book as well is it breaks it down in bits and pieces. Every chapter at the end has some exercises for journaling and really doing this work. And, I think for some of us, especially those that have worked in the events industry for any amount of time, it takes time to rewire. Like the neural pathways need time to breathe and marinate and to unravel and then come back together. So don't imagine that this is a quick fix. Like, I figured out boundaries. I can tick that off the to-do list and move on to something else. It is totally a process. And I think
it is a process. Part
of that is just giving yourself a little bit of grace and permission to do some of this big, scary, vulnerable work. And that it takes a little bit of time and also a bit of practice. Like you're going to flub it up, I guess, at some point, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that sometimes for people who struggle with boundaries, it's how do you say no? Like,
this is a big one.
It's a big, scary thing. So how do we say no effectively when we really do mean no? And stick with it. Like, because not every situation's a no, but not every situation's a yes either.
Right. So it's also checking in with the impulse to give the knee-jerk yes.
Yeah.
Which is what happens often. We want to give the knee-jerk yes, but we give the knee-jerk yes because we don't want someone else to be mad or disappointed or upset. We want to show up as the hero. We want to, we feel responsible or we feel obligated.
Yeah.
And the bottom line here is that the only yes we should really give is a deep desire. Yes. So I often coach my clients that when a direct request comes in, whether it's, an invitation for lunch, or will you help me do this, or, whatever it is, or an invitation to speak, or an
Right.
invitation for, anything.
Mm-hmm.
I will always, or can you do this for me? Can you do me a favor? Anything. I really ask my clients to check in first to see, can I say no right off the bat? Like, can I come in with my no here? And if I can't come in with my no, I'm just going to let the other person know I will get back to you tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
because someone else's urgency is not ours. And the pause is where everything gets to sort of percolate and marinate, and I can check in with me. Is this something I want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the most important piece about the no. I want you to say no from the place of gratitude and grace, not guilt and excuses.
Yeah.
So we don't owe an apology for our no. We don't owe any song and dance or reason for our no. A no can sound simply like, thanks so much for thinking of me. I'm not available.
Yeah. Yeah.
Period. Done.
End. Send.
End. Send.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And I
But
think
we get so caught up in the I have to give a reason. There has to be a reason for me to say no. And it's interesting, something I've been coaching a lot of people around in the pandemic right now is people don't want to say, everyone's saying like, well, people know I'm home. How can I say no to a phone call or Zoom? How can I say no? They know I'm here. Someone might say, can we Zoom? And, I'm not up for another video. Can we just talk on the phone?
yeah.
Whatever it might be, you can come back with a request of what works for you. But we don't have to say yes to everything just because we're in this, in this unusual time.
And I really appreciate the flipping the script a bit. It's not about guilt; it's about gratitude and grace when you say no. And I think that changes that feeling of I've let them down, or I've disappointed someone. All the things. Yeah, it feels good to me when you put it in those kinds of ways. In your book, you also talk about bottom line boundaries. Tell us, what are those, and how do we set and communicate those?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line boundaries really are the non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Of just this is what works or doesn't work. And we do them with the same script I was saying before, the same framework of, I feel X when you do or say Y. In order to take care of myself, I'm going to do Z. Yeah. But then I add something called the company line. So this is the line that we return to when the other person wants to attack, or the other person wants to engage in a fight, or the other person wants to engage in some way that, whatever it is. We just get to come back to, and really usually it's in order to honor myself, here's what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, it can be as simple as, I feel uncomfortable when you have more than 2 drinks when we're hanging out. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time that in order to take care of myself, if you go to the 3rd drink, I'm going to go into the other room.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying don't drink. I'm saying, here's what I'm going to do to take care of myself. So then what happens is we're in that scenario. And if this happens, if the 3rd drink happens, I need to extract myself. And if something comes up about it, where are you going? Remember, I let you know that in order to take care of myself, if you have more than 2 drinks, I'm going to go in the other room. That's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. And end of. No more explanations after that.
And that's it. And it doesn't have to be a whole dragged out thing. And it doesn't need to turn into a fight. It doesn't need to turn into antagonistic conversation. It's just really simply put, here's what I'm going to do so that I'm taking care of myself. Because what happens with the no and the yes is when we acquiesce and we say yes when we want to say no, or we don't stand up for the bottom line boundary of ours, we are betraying ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we've gotten so used to it. We're so accustomed to betraying ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we somehow continue to choose to create chaos in ourselves because we think that's what's keeping the peace externally. Mm-hmm. But here's what I really want to say about these bottom line boundaries. contrary to popular belief, the goal of relationship, of any sort of relationship, is not harmony at all cost. Because harmony at all cost comes at a very high cost to the way that I package myself to be digestible to you.
Yeah.
So it's really critical that we get clear on the bottom line boundaries. And, and they can show up in any form. It might be a bottom line boundary for me is I'm unwilling to date a smoker. And then what happens when I go on a date and I really like this guy and he smokes, then I have to reassess like what's happening here.
Yeah.
And boundaries are malleable. It's not like they're set in stone, but we have to look at the ways in which we're crossing our own boundaries there too around, just even, I pulled that date thing out, but just even in that scenario, how many women are looking to be picked and chosen as opposed to being the pickers and the choosers.
Yeah.
All across the board, not just in dating, but across the board. We are it's what the piece of the book you read. It's I'm going to become a chameleon so that you're going to pick me and choose me.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Right, please pick me and choose me and I'll be anything you want me to be.
Yeah.
And really it's like, what if we go into the world with, let me be the discerning one. Let me decide what I'm picking and what I'm choosing.
Yeah.
And that's a really big shift for women.
Huge. It's a completely different paradigm. And just imagine equally that both parties are doing that. I think that I can imagine a couple of my cynical friends are listening right now and going, well, hang on. What if my boundary is this? And then you say, well, my boundary is this. And they're both clashing. Like, what happens then? It's like, well, but that's my boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. So then what happens is, that's what I was saying before. There may need to be a renegotiation of the relationship. There may need to be a collaboration around what works so I'm not a big fan of compromise. I'm a bigger fan of collaboration because in compromise, someone's needs get lost.
Yeah.
But in collaboration, it's the win-win. How do we actually both get what we need here without feeling like either one of us has to collapse in order for that to happen?
There's so much, Nancy, so much in this book. I literally recommend it to everyone. Setting boundaries will set you free. You can get this book anywhere where books are sold, online or otherwise. I highly recommend it. And again, like I said, it's bits and pieces. There's exercises in there. You don't have to read the whole thing in one fell swoop. It takes time sometimes to create the scripts, understand what's actually happening underneath, test some things out, and, grow from there. So, Nancy, I've got a few questions as we wrap up that I like to ask everyone.
Okay,
and
cool.
Again, thank you so much for your time today. I know that there are going to be people that are listening that are going to something's going to break open and spark a new idea for them. So tell us, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
I'm reading a book called Patriarchy Stress Disorder.
Oof.
By Dr. Valerie Rain.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. And it really is going to the root of what we've been talking about women and people pleasing and peacekeeping and not rocking the boat. And ultimately feeling all of the less than, all of the I'm not good enough, all of that.
Yeah.
And it's really coming in right at the heart of it, right at the root.
Brilliant.
So I love it. I can't say enough about it. It's rocking my world.
Well, I will put a link in the show notes for people for that one. And again, show notes can be found at the Simplifierspodcast.com. So tell us, who's one person in your network, someone that you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things, and we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast as well.
Yes. A woman named Leslie Tagorda. And she is, she does brand astrology. So she's had a full corporate career in marketing and, and brand strategy, and also is also an astrologer. Wow. And then she went out on her own to merge these two. So she will do a reading with you as an entrepreneur, and she'll do your chart, but she'll also be able to come in with helping you identify who your ideal client avatar is through astrology. She'll be able to even give you, here are colors that you will want to use on your website based on your astrology. And it's fascinating. I was fascinated when I had my reading with her around ways in which there can be a real merging of something that we would think would be so separate. But yeah, so he does the astrology, brand strategy, and Leslie Tagorda.
Wow,
Yeah.
amazing. That sounds exciting. I
Yeah.
would love to connect with her. So
Yeah.
I believe that gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what's one thing you're grateful for today?
I'm really grateful for my personal practice of meditation and journaling,
Yeah.
especially during this particular time. I've had a many-year practice, and it is what keeps me grounded. It's what keeps me centered. It's what helps me find locating myself, and it's what helps me really put my attention on myself in that particular way.
It's beautiful. I am the same way. I find that a lot of times you've just given yourself permission to write, and
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden things come up and out of you, and the answers are all sitting in front of you. And it's a
They are.
very powerful experience. So people can find you online at nancylevin.com. Also, Instagram, Nancy_Levin. Again, all of these links will be in the show notes. Plus, you've got a free Facebook group called Transform Together. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes, I've got a free Facebook group. It's an incredibly engaged and connected community. I'm in there. The members are talking to each other, and it's a way to, it's a way to be able to have a safe space to share in this particular way, to allow ourselves to be seen, to tell the truth, to test drive new ways of expressing ourselves.
Yeah.
And I love it.
And not to do it alone. I think that's the key there.
And not to do it alone. Community is everything.
Yeah. So my final question for you today is this, Nancy. And again, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
You're
I want
welcome.
to
Thank you.
acknowledge you. I think that this is powerful work. It really will help so many. And I can imagine has helped you as well over the years.
Big time.
So someone somewhere is listening to this episode and she's in the thick of it. Maybe even that example you gave of, well, 2 drinks is this, but 3 drinks means this. And she is really grappling with how to uphold her own boundaries. What's one thing you could just whisper in her ear right now, just to encourage her in this moment?
Yeah. So what I would actually whisper is just this: your present moment choice predicts your future. Your present moment choice is your crystal ball. Yeah. Because if we look at where we are now in our lives, it is the culmination of every choice we've made up until now. So our present moment choice we have so much power, and we are so empowered to create the future we want for ourselves if we will begin paying attention to the present moment choices. There's no big or small choice.
Yeah, and you can do this.
Yeah, you can totally do this.
Choose wisely. Nancy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.